I'll start with closures. Now, what are closures? Closures are basically functions which are defined in, for example, another function. So in a local scope, which have access to the variables defined around them. So even if those variables are defined in the local scope of the outer function, so they are aware of their environment, the closures. And closures are a very useful tool, for example, when having callbacks in functions, where you want to execute a function as a callback, as this callback function is aware of its environment, so of the function which, well, resulted in the callback, or in any other function where you have a function inside a function. Now, I could imagine that this is not 100% clear, so why don't we just have a look at it and learn it while using it? So I will create a new function here in my JavaScript code, and I will name it generator. Now this generator will take an input, and then here I will define, let's say, a variable named number, which I will just set equal to input. And that's just to demonstrate what I was just talking about with the local scope. This function will then return something, and it will return another function. Now notice that this function here doesn't have a name. It's just function and then parentheses. So this function here is an anonymous function. We don't know its name, and we don't need to because we're not calling it from outside. We're just returning it here, and we will be able to use it as such a return value, but we don't need a name for it. And this function here is a closure. It's inside another function, and it's aware of its environment. We can use number or input inside this function, and it's an anonymous function. So here in this function, I could then again return something. I could return number times 2. Now this might look strange, but what do you think will happen if I create a new variable, which I call calc, and I set it equal to generator, let's say 900. And what do you think will now happen if I print console log calc? What do we see if I hit run? We see the function. Well, maybe you expected an error, or you expected to see 1800, but neither is the case, because we're executing generator, which is this function, of course, and we're passing 900. Now this function simply returns as a function. And all we're doing is we're binding this return function to calc, and then we're printing it. Therefore, we get the function which was returned. But since we do get a function as a return value, we can execute this function. And I do this by adding parentheses after calc, of course, because calc, this variable, is just referring to a function, the function we're getting back from generator to this closure. It's referring to this closure here. So if I clear this, run again, what happens now? Now I get 1800. And maybe this looks straightforward, maybe it doesn't, but it's kind of surprising what's happening here. Because I'm calling a function here, generator, and I'm passing 900. And it's not absolutely clear that the return function here, which uses number, will store this 900, this value, and keep it until we call it. It could also happen that we get this function, and at the time we call it, it's not aware of number. But that's not the case in JavaScript. That is what a closure is all about. It is aware of its environment, and it stores it, so that when we use that function here, which is bound to the calc variable, it will still know what number was equal at the time it was, well, returned. So this is really, really amazing, in my opinion. I can even show this if I add another variable, calc another, which is, let's say, generator 1000. If I hit run again, we still get 1800. So even though I'm now rerunning this function and I'm resetting number, I'm binding it to another variable, and therefore this old variable, this old closure, is not touched by that. As I said, it stores its environment. And this is a really powerful tool. And that is, as I said, why it's often used for callbacks which have to execute a function, because you're able to store the environment.